Um, hey everyone, we're doing our presentation on athletic trainers' attitudes toward lesbian, gay, and bisexual National Collegiate Athletic Association student athletes. It's a very long title.
So just the key question that they asked in this article was to determine heterosexual athletic trainers' attitudes towards student athletes in the NCAA.
So, just a little background. Basically, in 2008, the NCAA held a convention and they hosted a session called Timeout, a conversation about including lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender students. Basically, they used this to serve as like a wake up call to basically show like they are also participating in part of the athletic community and trying to give information about their culture and their experience within collegiate athletics. Researchers investigated heterosexual attitudes towards homosexual, focusing on factors that may predict attitudes. So basically, they were just testing the the notion of like, people that are heterosexual against homosexuals or something of that sort on the spectrum. They use sex, race, religion, education, contact, and how many times you've been around them, and everything as factors. But during this time, it showed that males have been found to hold more negative attitudes towards homosexuals than the females.
Some more background about it. Who had the more negative attitudes versus positive attitudes for the LGBTQ student athletes? Um, it was found that if you're more religious, you tend to have more negative attitudes towards them. Race also played a good factor as long as education. Um, you tend to have a more positive attitude when you have more education compared to less. People with more experience, kind of like Ariona mentioned, tend to hold more positive attitudes towards them as well. No published literature could be found investigating the athletic trainer's attitude towards these student athletes. Um, and then, according to Perrin, to become more diverse as a profession is to become more inclusive and accepting of students and colleagues regardless of color, national origin, race, religion, sex, or sexual orientation.
So basically, how was it kind of conducted? Because it's like a survey based. So it was a quantitative survey that they emailed to participants, and basically they tried to get the full population of ATs, which is just athletic trainers for shorthand, at NCAA institutions. Um, so they just used the big database to try to email that out. Some of the proposed, well, three of the big like proposed questions that they asked were: does sex, religion, or the presence of a family member or friend who identifies as LGB affect the AT's attitudes towards the LGBT student athletes? Mostly because, like I said before, contact experience was a big thing to determine whether or not you had a positive or negative attitude. Does age affect the AT's attitudes towards LGBT student athletes? Basically, like, are you older or younger, like where that falls? Because it shows like more younger people are now more accepting rather than older people. And then two, does working with an LGBT student athlete affect the AT's attitudes towards LGBT student athletes? And that's pretty like self-explanatory, that one. This was just an example survey that they used just to like show you what type of other questions they were using or how they rated their attitudes towards what they say is here lesbians, gay men, or bisexuals.
And then the data analysis from this survey is in total 3,134 ATs were contacted. Only 1,315 were returned, which is a 42% rate. Um, and then they only used 1,117 of them. Within the results, 86% were heterosexual, 10% were attracted to the same sex, 3% were attracted to both sexes, 0.5% were uncertain, and 0.3% were asexual. Um, and only the data that was included was from 964 participants inside this study.
So some of the results, most athletic trainers had a positive attitude towards the lesbian, gay, or bisexual student athletes. Nearly like 15% had negative attitudes. So you can see like it was kind of high for positive. Women and athletic trainers with lesbian, gay, or bisexual friends or family members, or those who at least cared for the people in that community, had more positive attitudes than did the men. And athletic trainers without those connections personally. Um, I cannot tell you what that last thing is supposed to say. Results were consistent. Oh, there was like a little study. The Harrigan, Glunt, and Rupper and Holleran found that people who had more contact with LGBT people, student athletes, had the more positive attitudes, and that was shown because of everything else. That was the point.
Just some limitations of the study. Unclear from the results of the study is whether the ATs who reported providing coverage to teams having no LGB student athletes actually did work with student athletes who identified as LGB. Individuals who felt more comfortable with this topic were more likely to respond than those who weren't. Whether an AT provided care for a student athlete who identified as LGB. The ATs were asked, are you aware of athletes on this team that you provide medical coverage to identifying as lesbian, gay, or bisexual during this academic year? And then gathering email addresses for the sample, they relied solely on their website to collect the ATs' addresses so they didn't get like a wider database.
So some of the major key points were women appeared to hold more positive attitudes towards LGBT student athletes than did the men. That was shown in about like 3 slides, so that was like a major driving point. The ATs who had LGBT friends or family or were aware of LGBT student athletes within the program had higher attitudes, positive attitudes, mostly because they were used to working with them. Like I said earlier, 15% of them held negative attitudes. While it is small, it is kind of a big, significant portion of number because it is still over like 10%, so it is kind of high. But as I said, like those have negative attitudes. And even though many attitudes were on the slightly positive to positive side, the existence of the 15% negative attitudes indicate that greater attention may be needed to ensure that the athletic training room environment is safe for all students and basically culturally, like I don't know the word, but important and shown.
The conclusion of the article was the investigators determined how all student athletes, including the LGB student athletes, were perceived in the AT room environment as it relates to diversity issues and sexual orientation. The thing that they said that they wanted to do was provide a more inclusive environment, include a transgender survey study, and assess diversity in the athletic training environment. And then they kind of wanted to advocate their education program called It Takes a Team, and kind of just include the development and distribution for athletic trainers so that they can become more educated and aware of this big topic that they could be dealing with every day that sometimes you may not even know about. So yeah.
That's how we're excited, and we're done.